So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got 36 clips on a few different topics for what I think should be a really good show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with my commentary between the clips. I won't have any of those quasi-news political comedy clips this week because the shows I use are still on break, though Bill Maher returns next week with a live real-time and a live stand-up concert from Washington, D.C., and then Saturday Night Live starts its new season in 2 weeks. But as usual, I will be using clips from all the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the regular Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. I'll cover several topics this week with a bunch of clips on President Obama's delay of any executive action to give relief to undocumented immigrants, and a couple clips on the situation in Ukraine, and a few clips on the battle for control of the United States Senate in the upcoming November elections. But about 2/3 of the clips, like last week, will be on the escalating U.S. military action against the Islamic group ISIS, or ISIL, or the Islamic State, whatever you're calling that Islamist group in Iraq and Syria. And I'll be playing several clips, including President Obama's announcement that he will address the nation on Wednesday on the subject of ISIS. And as serious as that sounds, the first few clips I want to play on the ISIS issue are actually the political comedy I always try to start the show with. And with no Bill Maher or Saturday Night Live, I had to find my own again this week. And as usual, Fox News Sunday was a good source right from the intro, where the three topics of the day on Fox News Sunday were an interview rehabilitating Mitt Romney, showing how right he was in 2012, followed by the obligatory mention of Benghazi, and finally a discussion of the rising tide against President Obama's no-strategy foreign policy. I kid you not, as you can see for yourself over in this clip.
I'm Chris Wallace. Former Governor Mitt Romney is pulling no punches, blaming President Obama for the growing number of hotspots around the world.
The president has a foreign policy which has failed once again, and as a result now we find ourselves facing a very severe and horrific series of scenes on the world stage.
Was Romney right in those 2012 presidential debates about Russia and other threats to the U.S.? And will he run again in 2016? Mitt Romney, only on Fox News Sunday. Then, a second American is executed by ISIS, and new charges about Benghazi and why help came too late.
We were told to wait, stand down.
I'd strongly believe if we'd have left immediately, they'd still be alive today.
We'll discuss Benghazi and threats to the U.S. with the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, Michael McCaul, and the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Robert Menendez. Plus, even Democrats are now urging the president to crush ISIS.
This is a direct attack on the United States. Time is up. Action must be taken.
Our Sunday panel weighs in on the rising tide against a no-strategy foreign policy. And our...
So yeah, and if you think that the discussion on Fox News of the rising tide against Obama's no-strategy foreign policy couldn't be as bad as that intro made it seem, well, here, I'll let you check out this equally horrible introductory question from Chris Wallace, starting that discussion with, oh, and before he asked his question, they start with this surprisingly hawkish clip of Senator Elizabeth Warren that you can see over here.
It is a threat to the world, and we need to be working with others to close ISIS down, to end ISIS.
Even liberal Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren seemed to be losing patience this week with President Obama's Hamlet Act about whether to go after ISIS in Syria. And we're back now with the panel. Bob, I want to talk to you about a line in your book, The Price of Politics, in which you write this up on the screen. Presidents work their will, or should work their will, on the important matter of national business. Obama has not. When you have liberal senators like Elizabeth Warren and Al Franken telling the president he needs to toughen up, I guess the question is, what is Obama's problem?
Well,
What is Obama's problem? Isn't that pretty much always the default question on Fox News? Anyway, before I get to the more serious clips on the ISIS issue, one more interaction I found kind of amusing was actually over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It actually involved a former Fox News pundit and still a neocon, Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard, and the way Democratic strategist Donna Brazile referred to him in a discussion on the medieval nature of the war with ISIS that you can see over in this clip.
what we hope to accomplish. The good news is that Secretary Kerry has spoken with the Arab League. They will now take action. And without the support of the Arab League, look, those Arab countries, they have skin in the game. This is a medieval war that we're looking at. To establish a caliphate, I had to ask Bill exactly what that meant.
I'm an expert on caliphates of all sorts.
And medieval politics, I might mind.
So Donna Brazile paid Bill Kristol that weird compliment about being an expert on caliphates, and I don't quite get that. But then she gave him the zinger at the end about being an expert on medieval politics too, which I thought was kind of funny anyway. But getting to the more serious news on the ISIS situation, NBC's Chuck Todd premiered as host of Meet the Press this week with an interview of President Barack Obama, and his very first question to the president on his very first show was on whether the president is taking the United States to war, as you can see over in this clip.
White House. Mr. President, welcome back to your 12th appearance on Meet the Press.
Great to see you.
Thanks for doing this. We start with a very basic question. Are you preparing the country to go back to war?
I'm preparing the country to make sure that we deal with a threat from ISIL. Keep in mind, this is something that we know how to do. We've been dealing with terrorist threats for quite some time. This administration has systematically dismantled al-Qaeda and the Fatah. ISIL poses a broader threat because of its territorial ambitions in Iraq and Syria. But the good news is, coming back from the most recent NATO meeting, is the entire international community understands that this is something that has to be dealt with. So what I have done over the last several months is, first and foremost, make sure that we got eyes on the problem, that we shifted resources, intelligence, reconnaissance. We did an assessment on the ground. The second step was to make sure that we protected American personnel, our embassies, our consulates. That included taking airstrikes to ensure that towns like Erbil were not overrun, critical infrastructure like the Mosul Dam was protected, and that we were able to engage in key humanitarian assistance programs that have saved thousands of lives. The next phase is now to start going on some offense. We have to get an Iraqi government in place, and I'm optimistic that next week we should be able to get that done. And I will then meet with congressional leaders on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I'll make a speech and describe what our game plans are going to be going forward. But this is not going to be an announcement about U.S. ground troops. This is not the equivalent of the Iraq War. What this is similar to the kinds of counterterrorism campaigns that we've been engaging in consistently over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And the good news is that because of American leadership, we have, I believe, a broad-based coalition internationally and regionally to be able to deal with the problem.
Now, one of the things I thought was interesting when he started talking about the speech he's going to make on Wednesday to the nation, explaining the situation with the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, or whatever you want to call it, in Iraq and Syria, is the way that he seemed to emphasize what he's not going to do as much as what he is going to do. And I'm going to show that another clip from the Chuck Todd interview with President Obama, where he talks specifically about what he wants Congress to get out of his speech on Wednesday, and he talks about what he's willing to do, and then you'll see even more emphatically about what he's not willing to do over in this clip.
This speech will allow Congress, I think, to understand very clearly and very specifically what it is that we are doing, but also what we're not doing. We're not looking at sending in 100,000 American troops. We are going to be, as part of an international coalition, carrying out airstrikes in support of work on the ground by Iraqi troops, Kurdish troops. We are going to be helping to put together a plan for them so that they can start retaking territory that ISIL had taken over. What I want people to understand, though, is that over the course of months, we are going to be able to not just blunt the momentum of ISIL, we are going to systematically degrade their capabilities. We're going to shrink the territory that they control. And ultimately, we're going to defeat them.
Long way.
So, like I said, I think it's kind of interesting that President Obama is emphasizing the things he's not going to do from his speech, although there was a lot more in that answer. And since this is Chuck Todd's first interview as host of Meet the Press, I wanted to look to see if he was going to do anything especially confrontational. And I don't know, the most confrontational, I mean, you can see the whole interview. I put a link down in the video description to Meet the Press. And then on the NBC website, they even have the whole unedited interview, and there's a link to that over on my Facebook page, facebook.com/LiberalViewer. Oh, and in case anyone's interested, you know, sometimes I look down at these notes here. I name the file names of all the clips the way I want to describe them, and then I make a list of those. So that's what I'm looking down at, and I've actually posted a picture of that list over on my Facebook page if you want to look at what my notes are, and I posted it to Instagram, although some of it got cut off. But anyway, I digress, and I wanted to show you one of the more confrontational questions I saw Chuck Todd ask President Obama, and this is the last one from President Obama on the whole ISIS situation, where you'll see it's kind of a snarky email. He brings up a snarky email and about what Saudi Arabia should be doing over in this clip.
I want to be very clear and very explicit about that.
I got a somewhat snarky email from a casual viewer who said, the United States gives a lot of military aid to Saudi Arabia. It's about time they use it. What do you say to them?
Well, I think that it is absolutely true that we're going to need Sunni states to step up. Not just Saudi Arabia, our partners like Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Turkey. They need to be involved. This is their neighborhood. The dangers that are posed are more directed at them right now than they are us. And the good news is, I think, for perhaps the first time, you have absolute clarity that the problem for Sunni states in the region, many of whom are our allies, is not simply Iran. It's not simply a Sunni Shia issue. Sunni extremism, as represented by ISIL, is the biggest danger that they face right now.
Assad.
So I thought that was an interesting answer to that somewhat confrontational question about why we're not pushing Saudi Arabia to, you know, why we're fighting the battles that should be Saudi Arabia's battles, or these other moderate Sunni states, or to the extent you think Saudi Arabia is a moderate state, but I guess it depends on who you're comparing them to. And I actually want to show the next clip is from my Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, Democratic senator, and she's head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, so she should have good information. And she's also talking about some of these Sunni states and answering a question over. She's on CNN State of the Union talking to Candy Crowley, and Candy Crowley asks her what's the one thing she wants to hear from President Obama in this speech that he's giving on Wednesday, and she doesn't just list one thing, but I guess if you're trying to pick one thing out, it seems to be that she wants to know more about the roles of all the coalition members, including Saudi Arabia and even possibly Iran, as you can hear her describe in this clip.
Strength. And Senator, the one thing you want to hear the president say to the American people Wednesday?
What the one thing is here Wednesday when he speaks is that what the change is, what the coalition of the willing is willing to do, what the Saudis are going to do, if in fact, and there's a difference of opinion on this, is Iran going to help? Iran has offered to help. I, for one, think that's useful. What other Middle Eastern countries are going to do, and what would be the prime role for America. I hope we have special operations. We have made air attacks now 137 times.
In Iraq.
We should have special operations working. We should use our ISR much more than has been. It's been difficult in Syria, but that is now ramping up. I believe we should go after their command and control, where there are caches of equipment, and use that ISR and take it out, as well as in Iraq, as the same thing.
Going to be.
Now, on that last point that Senator Dianne Feinstein made, I wasn't sure what ISR was. I Googled it after she said that, and apparently it means intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and she's talking about putting special ops not just in Iraq, I think, but maybe in Syria. And she kind of nodded along when CNN's Candy Crowley asked Representative Mike Rogers, who chairs the House Intelligence Committee, she, like the Republican counterpart in the House of Representatives, to what Senator Dianne Feinstein does in the Senate. And you can see that Candy Crowley asked Mike Rogers to explain this op-ed that he wrote in Time magazine, talking about actually using American forces and putting them at risk. And he basically says special operations forces in Syria is what he meant over in this clip.
We can pull out a part of it where you said this, referring to ISIS, is a terrorist organization that has an army, and we need to treat it that way. To defeat this enemy, we will have to risk Americans who will be operating in the fight. Okay, specifically, how would they be operating in the fight?
Well, you need two things to defeat ISIS the way they're configured. Remember, they have a governing council. They have an oil minister that they appointed that we think generates about $1 million a day in revenue for this terrorist organization that funds its operations, and we hope it doesn't go external. So what you have to do when you start acting like a government, you start acting in the control of that territory and an army, it presents targets of opportunity so that you can continue to degrade and dismantle them. That would mean that we have intelligence and special capability military forces that would have to operate with our allies, with our Arab League partners, with the Peshmerga, and we're not configured to do that today. And if we do that, we can add leverage to this fight in a way that can be very, very effective. But it does mean that we'll have some forces who will be exposed. This doesn't mean big military, 101st Airborne. It does mean these intelligence service folks and our
special operations, special forces military stuff.
Right.
I mean,
so I guess that's the extent of the boots on the ground in Syria that the more hawkish Republicans are advocating. And you notice President Obama never said anything about even the airstrikes in Syria yet. And as far as I can tell in that entire NBC interview, he didn't mention engaging in airstrikes in Syria. And the other sort of disagreement between Republicans and Democrats on ISIS seems to be whether they're an immediate threat of attacking the U.S. homeland. And it's not actually a completely partisan split, but it is mostly the Republicans who are hyping the threat of ISIS, I think. And the first clip I want to show of that is, of course, from Fox News Sunday, where Chris Wallace had on the Republican chair of the Homeland Security Committee, Michael McCaul, and talked about all these ISIS members with U.S. and European passports, which, you know, I showed one report that there are only 70 Americans, and then I hear some of the Republicans saying that there are hundreds of Americans who, with U.S. passports, who are fighting for ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, but I'm going to show some contradictory reports from ABC in a little bit about why ISIS isn't really such an immediate threat. But here you can see Fox News getting the Republican chair of the Homeland Security Committee, Michael McCaul, to say that ISIS is a big threat over in this clip.
Turn, gentlemen, to ISIS and the threat of ISIS to the U.S. homeland. Chairman McCaul, there's been a lot of talk about Americans, maybe as many as 100, who have left the United States, gone over to the Middle East, and are fighting alongside ISIS. How concerned are you about them coming home and conducting terrorist attacks, and especially as we approach this week, the 13th anniversary of 9/11?
I'm extremely concerned about this problem. I know intelligence officials, Homeland Security officials are concerned about this. We've had 2 be on the lookout notices that have already gone out by the FBI and Homeland Security officials. I think the biggest concern, Chris, is what you outlined, and that is we have somewhere between 100 to 200 Americans that have left the United States to go over there. We have tens of thousands of foreign fighters, many with Western passports that can get legally into Western Europe and many into the United States of America. And I think that's a threat. You don't know what you don't know. And as we approach the anniversary of 9/11, anniversaries mean a lot to Al-Qaeda. We know in the bin Laden compound he had plans to attack on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So I think we're going to be on a very high state of vigilance on 9/11. And I do think the threat is very real. But the best way to deal with this threat is to take out ISIS where they exist today. And that's not just Iraq, that's also in Syria.
I'm going to get...
So that was Representative Michael McCaul, the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, on Fox News Sunday, saying that the threat from ISIS against the United States, ISIS attacks in the United States, is a strong threat. And it wasn't just on Fox News. You can see another Republican. This is Republican Senator Marco Rubio. Oh, and I guess in honor of Marco Rubio, I should do a quick Marco Rubio, and you'll see he sounds like he needs a drink of water during much of this interview. And the first clip I'm going to show, he's over on CBS's Face the Nation talking to Bob Schieffer, and he's also saying that ISIS is a huge threat. He uses the word replete. I think he misuses the word, because if there are like even 100 U.S. citizens in the 10,000 ISIS fighters, I don't think that means they're replete with U.S. citizens. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after you look at Marco Rubio's first answer on the threat of ISIS on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Some new intelligence information here, because if I understood the president correctly this morning, he was not so sure that they pose a threat now to the U.S. homeland, but they could develop such a threat. Do you think they pose a threat to the homeland now?
I do. I believe they do. And I'll tell you why I believe that. First and foremost, because they are replete with both European and American fighters, more Europeans than Americans, who have passports that allow them immediate access into the United States. Second, because I think it's important not to overestimate the amount of intelligence that we have on these groups and about these groups. They have learned a lot about our intelligence gathering capabilities through a series of disclosures and other sorts of things, and they have become increasingly capable at evading detection. So for us to simply sit back and say we don't think they pose a threat because we haven't seen one, I think would be short-sighted. The fact of the matter is this group has among their ranks hundreds, if not thousands, of people with the capability of entering the United States quickly and easily, and we should not take that lightly.
Do you notice in the middle of Senator Marco Rubio's answer, he talked about how disclosures have made us less safe, and he's kind of talking, or I know he's talking about Edward Snowden and the NSA leaks. And you'll see in a few minutes I'm going to show the Democrat who was also on CBS's Face the Nation kind of backs up what Marco Rubio said there, where it's both the Republicans and the Democrats blaming danger against the United States on the Edward Snowden leaks, which I found that a little bit disturbing. But I want to show first another clip from Senator Marco Rubio talking about President Obama's upcoming speech on Wednesday, how he's hoping that President Obama is finally going to hype the threat of ISIS like he's been hyping the threat of ISIS. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip here.
What do you want to hear from the president?
Well, I want to hear what he should have said months ago, weeks ago, and that is, first, clearly explain to the American people what our national security interests are in the region, especially in what's happening in Syria and Iraq. Accurately describe to the American people the risk that ISIL poses for us short-term and long-term and why they matter. This is a group that has made very clear they want to establish an Islamic caliphate in the Middle East, and the only way they're going to be able to do that is to drive us from the region. And the way they're going to drive us from the region is through terrorist acts, including here in the homeland. And describe to us, by the way, the unique capabilities this group have, which includes a ton of funds, weapons, but also foreign fighters, including foreign fighters with passports that allow them easy access to the United States. Second, he needs to clearly outline what we're going to do about it. And I hope that that will include a sustained air campaign involving every element of our air power, targeting their supply lines, targeting their command and control structures, and I hope that will include their central command and control structures within Syria. I also hope he's announcing that he's going to target the refineries that they now control in Syria, revenues from which they're using to fund their operations.
And with Senator Marco Rubio there coming out in favor of these airstrikes against ISIS, or ISIL as he's calling it, in Syria, which has a lot of problems that, for example, President Assad in Syria has all these air defenses that we'd have to work around, or we'd have to come to an agreement with him. And actually, Bob Schieffer kind of calls Marco Rubio on his flip-flop, where he opposed airstrikes in Syria like a year ago when President Obama wanted to strike, but you'll see he differentiates between airstrikes on Assad and airstrikes on ISIS, and although it's kind of hard, they're both in the same country, so I'm not sure I completely buy it, but I'll talk about that a little more after I show you. Let's see, that is clip number 12 right here.
This is a bit of a change for you, is it not? You were a little reluctant about going into Syria, if I recall.
Well, if you recall, what the debate at that time was what the president characterized basically as a symbolic military action against the Assad government, which I thought would be counterproductive. I thought the best way to topple Assad was to arm, equip, train, and capacitate moderate rebel elements within Syria. I thought that was a better approach. This is different. We're talking about targeting ISIL, which is a group that poses an immediate danger to the United States. And if we are serious about defeating them, then we must strike them both in Syria and in Iraq. The previous debate was about what to do with Assad, and I thought the best way to topple Assad was not through airstrikes, but through equipping the moderate rebel elements.
So there you can see Senator Marco Rubio clearing up his change on airstrikes in Syria, because he didn't want airstrikes in Syria against Bashar al-Assad's forces, but now he wants airstrikes in Syria against ISIS, and which will kind of help Assad, and I don't know, it's all kind of a big mess. And actually, the clip I want to show from him on the whole foreign policy issue that I think shows most clearly he's running for president is this soundbite he came up with that President Obama is guilty of foreign policy malpractice, and you can see him describe that on this morning's Face the Nation on CBS over in this clip.
The president kind of went through this evolving explanation of our strategy. He famously said last week we didn't really have a strategy. Then he seemed to be kind of inching along here until he now says, you know, we have to really ramp it up and go after them. Do you think that he should have shown more of a sense of urgency? He has been saying we have to do this very deliberately, but do you think he should have shown more urgency in reacting to this?
I'm going to say something I don't take lightly, and I know that there's always differences between Republicans and Democrats. I try to certainly not allow that to filter into foreign policy, something that I hope will continue to be bipartisan. But I believe this president has committed presidential malpractice in his foreign policy. And I think that Exhibit A is what he's done with the Middle East. He ran for office under the notion that our national interest in the Middle East was to disengage as quickly as possible and disentangle from the region. And that has been chaotic. It has led to a series of policy pronouncements and words that he's evicted, whether it's saying that the ISIL was the JV, whether it's setting red lines that weren't enforced. All these things have been dramatically counterproductive to our foreign policy, and I think have created some generational and reputational damage to the United States of great significance. And this continued this week. You have mixed messages coming from the administration. They don't have a strategy. Are we going to contain them, or are we going to defeat them? The vice president says we're going to follow them to the gates of hell, but the president is saying that we're going to simply contain them. I mean, our allies are watching this as well, and they're concluding that the American foreign policy is in the hands of someone who does not know what he's doing.
Now that whole thing about presidential malpractice, you know, I'm a lawyer. I know what malpractice is. It's negligence. It's failure to show a duty of care, and usually I think failure to show a duty of care means that you rushed into something too fast, not that you waited too long, although I suppose you can be negligent by waiting too long, but I don't think that's the case. And also, I noticed Senator Marco Rubio brought up this talking point that I've heard on Fox News a lot about something President Obama said back in January, that ISIS or ISIL was the junior varsity team, and now he really should regret how he made that statement. And I actually have one more kind of confrontational question that Chuck Todd asked President Obama in the interview. One more clip on ISIS. I said before it was the last one, but this is actually the last one, I think. And Chuck Todd actually asked President Obama about that JV comment, and Obama denied that he had been talking about ISIS, and you can see that over here.
Long way from when you described them as a JV team.
Well,
was that bad intelligence or your misjudgment?
Keep in mind, I wasn't specifically referring to ISIL. I've said that regionally, there were a whole series of organizations that were focused primarily locally, weren't focused on the homeland, because I think a lot of us, when we think about terrorism, the model is Osama bin Laden and 9/11. And the point that I was...
You don't believe these people...
Not yet, but they can evolve. And I was very specific at that time. What I said was, not every regional terrorist organization is automatically a threat to us that would call for a major offensive. Our goal should not be to think that we can occupy every country where there is a terrorist organization.
You've not...
Well, of course, it's nice to hear a U.S. president say we can't occupy any country, ... Finish that sentence in any way you want. And it's a good thing to hear a U.S. president say. And I actually looked at the New Yorker article. I think it was it David Remnick was the guy who interviewed President Obama back in January. And if you look at the context, he wasn't specifically talking about ISIS, though he was talking about the jihadist groups in Iraq. So it was kind of like maybe he was talking about ISIS, but from the context, it wasn't clearly ISIS when he was talking about the junior varsity thing. And I said before I was going to show a clip from CBS's Face the Nation of a Democrat responding to what Marco Rubio had said about President Obama's malpractice or presidential malpractice on foreign policy. And that's the Democrat is Maryland Democratic Congressperson Dutch Ruppersberger, and you can see him respond to this accusation of presidential malpractice over in this clip.
Let me just start. Marco Rubio says the president is guilty of presidential malpractice. How would you put it?
Absolutely not. Let's talk about where we are. We have a very serious threat with ISIS. There's no question. We are the most powerful country in the world, and when we have a threat, we're going to take action. Now, what people don't realize is that people that I work with and people in intelligence and the Armed Services Committee, we deal with the military and the intelligence community every day. And they're the strongest in the world. And they are there advising the president and giving the president exactly what we need to do to protect Americans and to stop this threat. Now, I think the president made a mistake when he did not come out as strong after we had an American's head cut off, not one, but two. At that point, we should have, I believe he should have stood up and very strongly said, we're not going to take it, we're going to come after you, and we're going to bring you to justice. And I think the president realized that he had to be stronger. The vice president, who came out and said, we're going to follow you to the gates of hell. That's what we needed to hear, and we are doing that. And as a result of that, the president and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have organized, and they're bringing other countries involved. Because, you know, we in the United States, we're the most powerful, and people look to us for leadership. However, we also can't be sheriff for the whole world. We have other issues we're dealing with, too. And so if in fact, now that they know that we mean business, we have to have a strategy to take out ISIS, and we're doing it right now.
Well,
Now, the Democratic congressperson there, Dutch Ruppersberger, other than saying we can't be sheriff of the whole world, most of what he said there actually kind of agreed with Marco Rubio. He was kind of criticizing the president for not being strong enough, fast enough, and that, you know, now he's finally coming forward. And to his credit, Bob Schieffer kind of pointed that out to Dutch Ruppersberger, that he was agreeing with Marco Rubio. And you can see Dutch Ruppersberger try to deny and say he's only agreeing with himself, but then kind of agreeing with Marco Rubio again, going all the way through to mentioning the leaks that have made us less safe, specifically mentioning Edward Snowden at the end of the answer you can see here.
Really at risk because of what's happening in this situation.
So you're with Marco Rubio that ISIS poses a threat to the homeland now.
Well, I'm with Dutch Ruppersberger, and I'm going to say what I think. I think the thing that concerns me about the homeland more than anything else is the issue of Americans having passports who have gone to Syria, have become radicalized, and then they have the ability to get back in the United States or Great Britain or Canada. I'll give you an example. You had a individual, an American, who went to Syria, was radicalized, was trained as a suicide bomber, came home to see his parents, and then went back to Syria and blew himself up and killed other people. And we didn't pick up the visit to his parents. That individual was trained and could have attacked the United States. That's a concern to me. But let me say this from an American point of view. As of today, we don't have intelligence that says that there's going to be an attack tomorrow. Now, that can change the next day. And that's why we're so vigilant. That's why what happened with Snowden and these situations, we need to make sure we get the intelligence.
Let me just ask you this. Can you...
Geez, I wish Bob Schieffer hadn't interrupted him when he was starting to talk about Edward Snowden there. I'm not sure why that was, but you can see that the Democrat kind of agreed with the Republican about this threat of ISIS to the U.S. homeland and, all these people with U.S. and European passports. And, I mean, I suppose there is some threat there, but there's no specific threat, and there's actually a higher threat from some other groups that actually have been planning attacks against the United States for a long time. See, the thing about ISIS is it's not just a terrorist group. As I showed clips last week and some previous Liberal Viewer Sunday Live clip roundup shows, a lot of the leadership of ISIS is actually former Saddam Hussein military officers from Iraq. So the Ba'athist military officers who, their training isn't in terrorism. It's actually normal, regular army and military operations, and that may be why ISIS has been so successful in holding territory and coordinating their operations on different fronts, and because they have regular military officers. And so that means that ISIS is actually more concentrated, focused on holding territory and fighting its battles in Iraq and Syria right now, not hitting the United States. There are other groups that are actually more interested in hitting the United States, and there was several mentions of that over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. First, I'm going to show you a clip from Pierre Thomas's report. This is where he's talking about the other threats to the U.S. homeland other than from ISIS, especially with the upcoming anniversary of September 11th this week, over in this clip.
War engagement.
American officials continue to worry about Yemen bomb makers conspiring with al-Qaeda-affiliated radicals in Syria to make sophisticated bombs that can be smuggled on planes. That threat remains. And there's general concern that al-Qaeda and its affiliates are itching to get on the scoreboard, given all the attention ISIS is getting. Then there is the wild card. Homegrown radicals like the Boston Marathon bombers with no direct connection or oversight from al-Qaeda or ISIS who could act out on their own.
So yeah, there are all these other groups that are a bigger threat to the United States than ISIS is, and actually Peter King, Republican Representative Peter King, who from what I was reading recently may want to try to become the chair of the House Intelligence Committee once Mike Rogers retires to become a radio talk show host. But even Peter King, who is usually willing to hype the threat of just about any Islamic group, agreed with that part of the Pierre Thomas report and said that actually the threat, the immediate threat might actually be greater from old al-Qaeda because they're jealous of all the attention that ISIS is getting. As you can see over in this clip.
With you pretty much agree with Pierre's assessment there of the current threat?
Yes, George. I'm not aware of any particular threat right now. Having said that, especially at this time of the year, and considering we have ISIS, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and core al-Qaeda, all of whom have the ability and the goal of attacking the United States, we certainly have to be more vigilant than ever. And I would especially say with core al-Qaeda, ISIS has been on the front pages. They're getting the headlines. And I can see al-Qaeda wanting to get back into the game, if you will, to show that they are top in the Islamic terrorist world. So I think we can't just focus on ISIS. It has to be ISIS, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, core al-Qaeda, and of course, the homegrown threats. But again, the intelligence community is focused, Homeland Security community is focused, but we cannot let our guard down for a second.
So that's kind of surprising to hear a Republican downplay the threat of ISIS, but I guess it's only because he's hyping the threat from other Islamist groups, the more traditional al-Qaeda groups, and not this new ISIS threat. And you can, I'm going to show another clip from ABC's This Week. This is George Stephanopoulos talking to the Democratic Congressperson Adam Smith, and actually in the question framing it in such a way as to downplay the threat of ISIS, which you don't see a lot of questions asked by journalists that downplay the threat of ISIS, but it's this same analysis that I've been showing in these previous couple clips where the threat from ISIS is actually limited compared to other threats, and you can see that in the question George Stephanopoulos asked Democratic Representative Adam Smith over here.
Congressman Smith, there is some debate over the scope of the threat posed by ISIS. I was struck this week by the comments from the head of the National Counterterrorism Center, Matthew Olson. He said any homeland threat from ISIS is, quote, likely to be limited in scope and scale.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, al-Qaeda, particularly al-Qaeda in al-Qaeda's senior leadership in Pakistan, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen, they are the ones that have been actively plotting attacks against Western targets, attacks that we've managed to disrupt. ISIS at this point is primarily focused on Iraq and Syria. I think the real threat from ISIS is the foreign fighters from the United States and other Western countries that have gone to Syria to fight with them, who then may come back. But they pose a threat more as lone wolves than as sort of any sort of organized plot. There's no evidence at this point that ISIS is plotting and planning in the way that bin Laden was doing for 9/11.
So that's another member of Congress saying that there are other groups that are more of a threat to the United States than ISIS is, which you haven't seen a lot of on my show for the last several weeks, where just about everybody seems to be hyping the threat from ISIS. So I'm glad to see some, both Democrats and Republicans. I think I showed a few Democrats saying the same thing over the last few weeks, that ISIS is more concentrated on holding territory in the Middle East, in Iraq and Syria, and ISIL actually means Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which includes Lebanon and Jordan and Israel, and so they have a lot of ambitions in the area before they get to the part where they're attacking the United States, I think. If I'm understanding their ideology, even though they do have an anti-American ideology that probably does include eventual attacks on the United States. But one other area of bipartisan agreement I wanted to show from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos on this issue was between the Democrat Adam Smith and the Republican Peter King on whether President Obama needs to get authorization from Congress before he takes action against ISIS in Iraq and even in Syria. And they both agreed that he doesn't need the authorization because he's acting in self-defense against a national security threat, which, I don't know, is a pretty expansive definition of that power, I think. But then they also both said that it would be good if he did get the authorization, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over here.
The president's new strategy on Wednesday. He's also seeming to suggest this morning that he has all the authority he needs now to take action even against Syria. Do you agree with that, or do you think he should come to Congress?
As Republican, I do believe the president has the constitutional authority to take action now in Iraq and in Syria against ISIS. I believe as a matter of course, it's probably better for him to get congressional approval, but which I would certainly vote for, but I don't believe he needs it. And if that's going to delay what he wants to do, he should go ahead and just take action without waiting for Congress. This is too important to get this bogged down in a congressional debate if the president does not believe the support is there. If it is there, ideally he should get it. But I believe as Commander-in-Chief, he has the absolute power to carry out these attacks.
Is the support there, Congressman Smith, and should the president come to Congress?
Well, it's hard to tell at this point whether or not the support's there, but I agree with Peter. I think under Article 2, the president definitely has the authority to confront a national security threat. I do think it would be better if Congress would authorize it. The devil there is in the details. What does the language look like? What would Congress actually authorize? I think you'd have a deep divide between people who are worried that it would be too much of a blank check, too broad of authority, and others who might worry that it would constrain the president. So I think getting the exact language through Congress would be extraordinarily difficult, even though I agree with Peter, that's what we ought to do. We ought to set the policy that we think the president ought to follow.
So I thought that was an interesting comment from the Democratic Congressperson Adam Smith, especially about how it might be difficult to get the right language because of the split in Congress. And I think there's actually a split in both parties on this, because there are some of the Tea Party libertarian wing of the Republicans who want to be, they call themselves non-interventionists, not isolationists, but Rand Paul, although now Rand Paul is making more hawkish statements about what he would do against ISIS, and but then there is sort of, even if Rand Paul's not leading it, there is at least some non-interventionist wing of the Republican Party, and then there's also the more dovish wing of the Democratic Party, and then both parties also have their more hawkish wings. And speaking of the more hawkish wing of the Republican Party, I want to show a couple clips from Ted Cruz as the last two clips I'm going to show on the whole ISIS issue. And first you can see Ted Cruz coming out strongly in favor of airstrikes on ISIS, even in Syria, though that isn't the main thrust of where we should go after them. But I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip from ABC's This Week, talking to their reporter Jeff Zeleny over here.
After bringing GOP activists to their feet, we asked him what he would do.
What we ought to have is a direct, concerted, overwhelming air campaign to take them out.
In Iraq and Syria?
The focus should be Iraq, but the real focus should be taking out ISIS. Within Syria, it should not be our objective to try to resolve the civil war in Syria. You said that.
And then I cut it off there. The next question from Jeff Zeleny is about whether Ted Cruz stands by his comment that we should bomb ISIS back to the Stone Age. I think that's kind of what he asked over in this clip.
You said that the U.S. should bomb ISIS back into the Stone Age. Should that take congressional approval, or does the president have the authority to do this on his own?
It should absolutely take congressional approval.
But not all Republicans agree.
So yeah, that was Ted Cruz saying that it does take congressional approval to bomb people back into the Stone Age. I don't think it specifically says that in the U.S. Constitution, that's a triggering mechanism for Congress's power to declare war, that when you're bringing someone back into the Stone Age. But it's kind of interesting that Ted Cruz says that Congress has to authorize these strikes. Well, you saw that bipartisan agreement between Peter King and Adam Smith on ABC's This Week previously, that he doesn't need authorization, though he should probably try to get it. Anyway, those are all the clips I want to show on the upcoming presidential speech on U.S. military action in Iraq and Syria against the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or just the Islamic State, whatever you want to call it. Since I'm on the issue of foreign policy, I want to show a couple quick clips on the situation in Ukraine. There's been a ceasefire that's been holding, apparently, and then there are negotiations going on as to what's going to happen next. But, of course, over on Fox News, the fact that there is a ceasefire and things haven't been solved yet was enough to find reason to try to get their guests to attack President Obama's foreign policy, of course. And that was the situation with both guests. First, the first clip I want to show is Chris Wallace teeing up the Republican Representative Michael McCaul, the chair of Homeland Security, to get him to talk about Obama's weakness, since there's been this ceasefire that gives all this advantage to Russia in the separatists holding the eastern part of Ukraine over in this clip.
To share it evenly, because I want to talk about Ukraine. where there's now a ceasefire, but a ceasefire that leaves the pro-Russian separatists in control of large swaths of eastern Ukraine. President Obama said he's skeptical about the ceasefire, but he also seemed to, in a sense, see it as a victory for NATO. Take a look at this.
The only reason that we're seeing this ceasefire at this moment is because of both the sanctions that have already been applied and the threat of further sanctions.
Chairman McCaul, who's won here, the U.S. and NATO or Putin and Russia?
Well, I think long-term Putin is winning. I think weakness invites aggression. That's what you're seeing. I think Senator Menendez has called this an invasion, and I agree with that. The Crimea example is, I think, the model here that Putin, if you look at long-term strategy, what is he trying to accomplish? I believe in targeting Russian-speaking peoples across not only Ukraine but the Baltic nations is a policy to regain the glory days of the old Soviet Empire. And with respect to the ceasefire, yeah, we're all very hopeful, but the problem is, even this morning now, you had airstrikes that have basically violated that ceasefire agreement. So I think we're dealing with a very dangerous force here. And I don't think until NATO and the United States leads and actually arms Ukraine with lethal weapons are you going to see Putin really backing off.
Well,
So yeah, that's one of the two clips I want to show you on Ukraine, Representative Mike McCaul. And then the other guest that Chris Wallace had on was Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, who I showed last week, actually making comments on the situation in Ukraine from Kiev on a different show. And one of the things he said that President Obama hasn't been willing to say is that Russian troops have invaded Ukraine. So, of course, Chris Wallace on Fox News got to get him to, or tried to prompt him to attack the Obama administration with that fact, and also with this whole problem with the ceasefire, which at least Senator Bob Menendez pointed out that a ceasefire is just a first step, and it's a good first step, but you can see that exchange between Chris Wallace and Bob Menendez over in this clip.
Well, Senator Menendez, you're just back from the region. As Congressman McCaul pointed out, you have called it an invasion, even if the administration hasn't. You have called for sending military weapons to Ukraine, even though the administration hasn't. Are you satisfied with a ceasefire that leaves the separatists in control of broad swaths of territory in eastern Ukraine?
Absolutely not. Look, until Russia returns its thousands of forces and tanks and military equipment back over the border into Russia, and there is a border that is secured, hopefully with international observers, and Ukraine's territorial sovereignty is retained, there is not a solution. This is a temporary pause. And we have to take Putin's calculations and show him he's wrong, which means that sanctions being considered beyond what we've done by both the EU and the United States should take place, should move forward. Right. And secondly, that we should give the Ukrainians the ability to fight for themselves. That will change Putin's calculations.
Senator.
So I thought that was a more reasonable answer from the Democrat than from the Republican, although actually they kind of agreed on a lot of things. You know, as I showed last week, Senator Bob Menendez is one of those Democrats who's more hawkish on Ukraine, wants lethal military aid and some of the things that the Obama administration hasn't been willing to do, and of course stronger sanctions. But those are the only two clips on Ukraine. It wasn't much discussed. It's one of those issues that's ongoing but kind of falls off of the Sunday shows some weeks, kind of like Israel and Gaza, and well, several issues have fallen off. But one of the issues that has been a perennial and has fallen off the show sometimes, but had several different I have several different clips on this week, is the immigration issue. You know, comprehensive immigration reform died after it was passed by the U.S. Senate. The House of Representatives never brought it up and brought up almost nothing on immigration. And so President Obama was supposedly said last June that he was going to take executive action before the end of the summer that would give some relief to the, you know, there are 11 million and undocumented immigrants. Some people say even more than that in the United States. And he was going to give relief to maybe 4, 5, 6 million undocumented immigrants where they wouldn't have to worry about being deported, because President Obama has deported more people than any American president in history, from what I understand, and that's actually going to come up in one of the clips. But anyway, President Obama has decided that he's not going to take that executive action before the end of the summer. He's going to wait till after the November elections, although he's not framing it in political terms. And you can hear him explain that to Chuck Todd in the interview Chuck Todd did on NBC's Meet the Press, and specifically try to claim it's not political over in the first clip on the issue I want to show over here.
When we go to immigration, you made a decision to delay any executive action until after the election. What do you tell the person that's going to get deported before the election that this decision was essentially made in your hopes of saving a Democratic Senate?
Well, that's not the reason. A couple of things that I want to say about immigration. Number one, I have been consistent about why this is important. The country is going to be better off if we have an immigration system that works, that has strong border security, that has streamlined our legal immigration system, so the best and the brightest who want to stay here and invest here and create jobs here can do so, that families can be unified, and that a system where the millions of people who are here in many cases for a decade or more, who have American kids, who are our neighbors, who oftentimes are our friends, that they have a path to get legal by paying taxes and getting above board, paying a fine, learning English if they have to. So the good news is we have bipartisan support for that. We have a Senate bill that would accomplish that. The House Republicans refused to do it, and what I said to them was, if you do not act on something that's so common sense that you got labor, business, evangelicals, law enforcement, you got folks across the board supporting it, then I'm going to look for all the legal authorities I have to act. I want to make sure we get it right. I want to make sure, number one, that all the T's are crossed.
Looks like politics. I mean, it looks like election year politics.
Not only do I want to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, but here's the other thing, Chuck, and I'm being honest now, about the politics of it. This problem with unaccompanied children that we saw a couple of weeks ago, where you had from Central America a surge of kids who were showing up at the border, it got a lot of attention. And a lot of Americans started thinking, we've got this immigration crisis on our hands. And what I want to do is, when I take executive action, I want to make sure that it's sustainable. I want to make sure
the public's
that
not behind you. You're not taking it. It sounds a little bit like you're concerned the public wouldn't support what you did.
What I'm saying is that I'm going to act because it's the right thing for the country, but it's going to be more sustainable and more effective if the public understands what the facts are on immigration, what we've done on unaccompanied children, and why it's necessary.
Of course, President Obama never really explained how it is the public is going to understand those things more after the election than before the election. And I think I agree with a lot of what he said in that answer about how we got where we are, but the fact that it's not political, I find that a little bit hard to believe, and especially because I'll show a clip in a minute that there is reporting that some of the White House some of the White House sources are specifically telling reporters it is political, and I'll get to that clip in a minute. But first I want to show an ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip. Their reporter Jim Avila, who's done a lot of good reports on the immigration issue, and he covers this latest news about the delay and some of the basis for why it's a political decision and how it comes from the problem of the unaccompanied minors that showed up over the summer, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over here.
Barack Obama's presidency has been marked by a love-hate relationship with Hispanic voters, courting and winning Latino votes key to his elections with promise after promise to reform immigration.
I see the process moving this first year. So let's get immigration reform done this year. If Congress will not do their job, at least we can do ours.
That June Rose Garden promise of action this summer reaffirmed just Friday.
I'll be making an announcement soon.
but within hours soon became not until after the midterm elections, inviting another embarrassing moment for President Obama, with a growing Latino constituency increasingly frustrated by delays. Fusion's Jorge Ramos struck a nerve the last time immigration reform was delayed.
A promise is a promise, and with all due respect, but you didn't keep that promise.
And already Latino groups are claiming betrayal.
It's outraged and extremely disappointed and frustrated at another delay by the president.
So what happened? A humanitarian crisis at the border, with thousands of Central American children flooding into the U.S., invigorating GOP calls for more border security. We found in Guatemala just last month makeshift rafts filled with immigrants crossing illegally into Mexico, heading to the U.S. I boarded one with no papers, no IDs checked.
It cost me $5 to bring 3 people over here from Guatemala to Mexico.
All of it giving Republicans ammunition to charge the president cannot be trusted to enforce the law.
You know, you wonder why people are cynical and demoralized when politicians say, well, I want to do something that's utterly lawless, but I'm going to wait until after an election.
The White House, in the end, deciding acting alone on immigration would incite Republican turnout at the midterms, while calculating the Latino love-hate relationship will warm again when the president does finally act. For this week, so that's kind of the background on this decision from President Obama. And I don't know, I've worked a lot in the immigrants' rights community in the last couple of years, and I think there will be a lot of people who are disappointed. There are people who are even disappointed with the bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform didn't go far enough. And you didn't really see a lot of that disappointment on the shows this morning, though. They did have a couple of the pro-immigrant rights Congress people on. The first one I want to show is from that same ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos program. They had Representative Luis Gutierrez on to respond right after that Jim Avila report I just showed you, and asking him if he was part of the outraged Latino community because of the delay in executive action. And I will show you that clip, number 27, right over here.
Joining us this morning, you just heard Jim Avila right there saying the White House calculating that all is going to be well with the Latino community if he acts after November. Are they right?
Well, first of all, it's clear that playing it safe is what is going on at the White House and among Democratic circles. And playing it safe means walking away from our values and our principles. Look, they've looked at polling in 4 or 5 states where there aren't large Latino constituencies and said that's the way forward, without thinking of the impact that that policy might have in Illinois, in California, and Colorado. And so they've walked away. But, you know, George, playing it safe might win an election. Sometimes you lose an election playing it safe also. But it's almost never leads to fairness, to justice, and to good public policy that you can be proud of. Latinos have supported this president. I mean, let's look at the Latino vote in the Latino community. 2008, critical to the president's election. 2010, many say we kept the Senate in Democratic hands because of Latino voters.
But my question is, are they going to forgive the president
Hagan won
if
in
he
North
acts?
Carolina principally because of Latino votes. They were the margin of victory. In 2012, it was that way again, George.
So yeah, I pretty much agree with everything Luis Gutierrez said right there. And also what he said that was more important, I'm going to show in this next answer, is that whatever the politics, real people are getting hurt by this delay in giving relief to undocumented immigrants. And you'll see Luis Gutierrez also mentions how President Obama has deported more people than any other president, when he's also talking about the human cost over in this clip.
But let's not forget that there are 11 million people who work in this country, raise families, work, and live in this country. Most of them have been here 10 years. Most of them have been here 10 years of the undocumented without visas. And they work and raise families in this country, and they should be given a chance to come out of the shadows, right? What does that mean, coming out of the shadows? That means not being hunted down. That means not being treated like a fugitive. And President Barack Obama in the last 5 years has deported more people than any other president in the history of the United States. So I think that that's the reality. And while we wait until November, because that's the president's decision, there's going to be another 60,000 people deported. So there is pain and suffering in the community, and there's a lot of anguish and anger.
So, yeah, I think that's a real important thing to remember, that while the politics are being debated, that there are real people who are getting hurt and real people who are getting deported. And I want to show one additional clip of the Latino feeling of betrayal from the delay in executive action on undocumented immigrants. This is actually from CNN State of the Union, where Candy Crowley had on California Representative Tony Cardenas, asking him about his sense of betrayal over in this clip.
I understand you're a Democrat and the president is the party leader as well as the president, but we have heard nothing but criticism, and pretty harsh criticism from advocacy groups for Latinos and for undocumented workers, saying this is a betrayal. The president is playing politics. Do you share any of that outrage?
Well, I believe that when we met with the president, he meant what he said. I think the president eventually is going to take executive action, because I don't see Speaker Boehner or the Republicans coming to do their job and actually put something on the floor so we can all vote for it, like the Senate passed by 68 out of 100 votes. But at the same time, Candy, I'll tell you honestly, the bottom line is, of course, there's some politics going on. I don't like what the president's advisors may be telling him. I can only speculate that they've encouraged him to wait, but I would prefer that he do it now. There are 11 million people here in the shadows in the United States, and by and large, Candy, they're here to work, and they're a boon to our economy. For example, if the president were just to do parole in place, that would affect a few million people and allow them to work, have a work visa while they're here, while they're getting their documentation in order, and that would put a lot of businesses around the country on better footing.
So I also agree with everything that Representative Tony Cardenas said there, and I guess that's not surprising because he's a pro-immigrants' rights Democratic congressperson from California. But what was a little more surprising was the way that Republican Representative Mike Rogers, who I mentioned is retiring as from being the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, he was also over on CNN State of the Union with Candy Crowley, and she tried to get him to say that President Obama was wrong for delaying this decision till after the election, and tried to get him to say that, the Republican talking point about how it's illegal executive action, and she tried to get him to say it once and twice, and he just wouldn't take the bait, as you can see over in this clip.
Congressman Rogers, so the president has delayed this executive order that he indicated in June would happen at the end of the summer. Why did he do that?
Well, I think he's being prudent about it. When you look at, this is such an emotional issue all across America, I think that was wise. He needs to work with Congress on this. It's not just about the immigration problem of the illegals who are in the United States and what their status might be. That southern border has become a national security issue, a public health issue for the United States, and certainly a local security issue. All of those things need to be, I think, addressed. The best way to do that is do it in a cooperative effort with Congress. I think you'll get a much better product, a secure border, and we can move forward.
Right. Let me just intervene here and tell you that the president says he's going to do this executive action right after the midterm. So you don't see this as a political action on the president's part. You think it means he's going to cooperate with Congress and come up with an immigration bill?
Well, I clearly think that it's political in the sense that he understands how unpopular that decision would be with Americans. And it's probably not the right decision. As a matter of fact, not probably, it isn't and would not be the right decision for him to do that. I hope he doesn't do it after the election. I think at least he postponed it at this point. Again, people rushing to do this, there are lots of implications here for national security, local security, public health security, costs of education. There are huge problems with this. The best way to do this is to bring people together and work with them in Congress. I think we can come up with a bill that secures the border and gets to, moves this issue along to a place where Americans can be comfortable with it. I think it's very risky for the president. He's already has a bit of a credibility crisis. To take this step, I think it would make a very long 2 years remainder in his presidency.
So that was kind of interesting that Representative Mike Rogers there wouldn't attack the president, even though he was definitely setting up the president for saying he shouldn't take this executive action after the election either. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that all the Republicans were so moderate and so willing to call President Obama prudent on his immigration decision. I want to show Senator Marco Rubio back over on CBS's Face the Nation, where he was very quick to accuse President Obama of engaging in politics. And the really amusing thing about his answer to Bob Schieffer here on whether President Obama had engaged in politics is that he then goes on to talk about how he flip-flopped on his own bill because of politics, but doesn't actually say it's because of politics. You'll see he calls his own bill a one-size-fits-all bill, and his answer accusing President Obama of politics over in this clip.
A little bit about the president's statements over the week on immigration. He was planning on taking executive action on immigration reform because he said the Congress wouldn't do anything. Then we were told yesterday that the president has decided, in fact, he will put off any executive action until after the election. White House aides who were briefing reporters on this made no bones about it. They said they were doing this because Democrats, some of them in very tight Senate races, Democratic Senate candidates, felt it was going to hurt their chances for re-election. The president says it's not politics that's behind it, but what do you think? What do you make of all this?
It's definitely politics. But let me say this. I think that we have to deal with immigration. We have a broken enforcement system on immigration. We have a legal immigration system that's outdated and needs to be modernized so we can win the global competition for talent. We have millions of people living in this country illegally, many of whom have been here for a decade or longer. We need to find a reasonable but responsible way of incorporating them into American life. Last year, we tried to do that through a one-size-fits-all comprehensive approach. It didn't work. We don't have the support for that. The only way we're going to be able to address it, and I believe we should, is through a sequence of bills that begins by proving to people that illegal immigration is under control, modernizing our legal immigration system, and then dealing with those who are here illegally. If the president takes executive action, he will make achieving that, which won't be easy, even harder. So I'm glad he's not going to do it, but I'm disappointed he intends to do it anyway after the election, because what he's basically saying is he doesn't want to be held accountable by the electorate in the midterm elections for an action that he knows is unpopular, because the American people don't want to do anything on immigration until they know that the border and the illegal immigration system is secure.
That last part where Senator Marco Rubio is talking about not wanting to be held accountable for an action that is unpopular with the electorate, I think he's kind of talking about his own complicity in the bipartisan Senate comprehensive immigration reform that he helped co-author and now is unpopular with the Republican base. And I don't know what you think, but I think he sounded like someone who's running for president and trying to come up with a new position on immigration that will help him in the primaries. But I don't want to end the clips I show on the immigration issue without showing you a couple clips from Fox News Sunday, where they also tried to get their guests to talk about Obama delaying this immigration decision or executive action on immigration because of political considerations. And of course it worked with the Republican, but first I'm going to show you the Democrat. That was Democratic Senator Bob Menendez was on Fox News Sunday and responded to the political or the all politics charge, charging President Obama with engaging in politics by delaying this decision over in this clip.
President Obama has decided to delay any executive action on delaying the deportation of millions of illegals until after the November election. Senator Menendez, let me start with you. Are you disappointed with the delay? And isn't this all about politics and the fact that a bunch of red state senators that are seeking re-election, Democratic senators seeking re-election, didn't want this before the November election?
Well, Chris, the red state senators already voted. I think most of them voted in favor of comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform. So they're on the record on that. I don't think
yeah,
it's
but they're not
that.
on the record on executive action, sir.
Well, that's what the focus is more about the question of executive action. Yeah, and I'm deeply disappointed that the president hasn't acted where House Republicans have failed to act. This was sent over to them over a year ago with a strong bipartisan vote in the Senate. But look, Republicans are on the wrong side of the inevitable tide of history here. And I think you could ask your previous guest, Mitt Romney, how it's impossible for Republicans to have a road to the White House without embracing immigration reform and the immigrant communities.
So it's good to see someone on Fox News and Fox News Sunday making those points that Republicans are on the wrong side of history on comprehensive immigration reform, and that all these Democrats who are up for re-election have already made their position clear through their vote on comprehensive immigration reform. But of course, Fox News host Chris Wallace, or Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace, also had the same setup for his Republican guest, Representative Mike McCaul, teeing him up to say how this was all political and waiting till after the election was a bad mistake for President Obama. In my final clip on the immigration issue over here.
Chairman McCaul, some of your fellow Republicans are saying, look, the president still wants to go around the law. He's just going to wait until after November when voters can no longer hold him accountable.
Well, I think it's totally politically calculated. He's made this determination that if he gets out in front on this issue, it will hurt 7 to 8 Senate races, and he could potentially lose the Senate. I think Harry Reid has sent that message clearly to the president, which is why I think you've seen him back off of this position. So I think it's nothing more than raw politics, and the idea of amnesty by executive action, I think to House Republicans does not sit well.
So that's the last clip I want to show you on the immigration issue, and it's basically saying that what may actually be true, even though it's coming from a Republican there, that President Obama has decided to put off his decision, his executive action, giving relief to millions of undocumented immigrants who are facing deportation until after the November election, because the Obama administration has decided that it would be too upsetting to what is a close race already as to who's going to control the U.S. Senate after the November elections. And so they don't want to do it until after the election because they're hoping for the Democrats to hold on to control. And I actually think that that's a mistake. I think that it is more likely that it would energize the base to make this decision before the election, and I think that it's not going to energize the Republican base any more than it already is, but that's just my opinion on the immigration issue. And on the whole issue of the fight for control of the U.S. Senate coming up in the November elections, I want to show you a few quick clips before I end the show. First, the guru of polls, Nate Silver, who used to have the 538, or I think he still has the 538 website, and he was the most accurate pollster for the 2012 presidential election. He was over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking about his continuing prediction that the Republicans are most likely to take the U.S. Senate in the upcoming November elections. I think it was, 64% chance that he explains to George Stephanopoulos over in this clip.
Stats guru Nate Silver revealing in their newest projection that Republicans have a 64% chance to retake the Senate and control Congress. And Nate Silver joins us now. Nate, thanks for joining us. How do you get to the calculation?
So we look mostly at the polls, but also at the kind of historic context and where these elections are being fought. So the average state up in the Senate this year is in a state where Obama won only 46% of the vote in 2012. Republicans only have to win 7 seats in states that Mitt Romney won to take control of the Senate next year.
Yeah, and you've got
So basically, where the battles are being fought favors Republicans, which is why Nate Silver is giving a 64% chance that the Republicans will take over the U.S. Senate in this upcoming election in November. But there was an important caveat a little later in the interview where Nate Silver pointed out that he doesn't have as much data as he would like for really accurate predictions, as you can see over in this clip.
One of your big points is that the board is especially uncertain this year. Why?
We don't have a lot of polling. It's getting a little bit better now, but there are some states, Colorado, we got one poll yesterday. That was the first poll we'd had in 6 weeks there. Louisiana, like you mentioned, Alaska. We just don't have a good sense for what's going on. We also have polls among registered voters. You know, there's a big Republican turnout edge normally in the midterms. We don't have a good sense for how big that is. So it's not that there are any states or that many states that we're sure the GOP will win. It's that they have a good, robust map. It's kind of like Obama versus Romney in 2012, where he didn't have to win every swing state. He had a big set of base states, and then if he won a couple of swing states, he'd win the election, whereas Romney had to kind of sweep almost all the competitive races. So the way you saw before, where 8 targets against 3, that's why the math favors Republicans this year.
Okay, Nate.
So again, at the end of that comment, you can see Nate Silver explaining that where the battles are being fought really favors the Republicans for the November elections, and but he also admitted that his data isn't complete or isn't all that extensive, so it's still sort of an open question. And as to whether it's important whether Republicans or Democrats control the U.S. Senate, that was one of the issues that Chuck Todd brought up with President Obama in his interview over on Meet the Press, and that's the last clip I want to show you for the show tonight. President Obama explaining why he thinks it's important that Democrats keep control of the U.S. Senate after the November elections, in response to sort of a cynical analysis from NBC's Chuck Todd when he premiered as host of Meet the Press over in this clip.
I'm going to be a little cynical here. $3 billion, I would argue, is being decided to see if it's Harry Reid or Mitch McConnell that's in charge of gridlock in the Senate. I mean, we're talking either, what's the difference between a 2-seat Democratic majority and a 2-seat Republican majority as far as your agenda is concerned?
First of all, there's a sharp difference between the Democratic agenda and the Republican agenda. And the American people need to know that. If you've got a Democratic Senate, that means bills are being introduced to raise the minimum wage. That's something Democrats support. We think America needs a raise.
Where's that on your desk?
I'll get to that. Equal pay for equal work. We care about that. The Republicans, that's not their priority. We think it's important to make sure that issues like family leave and family-friendly policies and more effective child care are in place so that folks are getting help, that young people are getting more assistance when it comes to paying for college educations, rebuilding our infrastructure, putting folks back to work on our roads, our bridges, all of which would boost our economy now and boost it into the future. On all those issues, there is a sharp contrast. Now, it is true that if the House stays Republican, that it's unlikely that I get a lot of these bills to my desk. But it makes a big difference if we've got at least one branch in Congress that is presenting these ideas, making arguments. I know that, you know, given the gridlock that we've seen over the last couple of years, it's easy to say that these midterms don't matter, but the fact of the matter is that on every issue that's important to middle-class Americans, overwhelmingly we're seeing a majority prefer the Democratic option, and us having a Democratic Senate that can present those issues and put them forward, just like they did on immigration, even if the House Republicans fail to act, means that we're debating the right stuff for the country. We're debating the things that are going to help us grow.
This wouldn't.
No, I'm actually kind of skeptical of a lot of those issues that President Obama mentioned there being affected by whether there is a slight majority of Democrats or slight majority of Republicans in the U.S. Senate, because there's been a several-seat majority by Democrats, and none of those things have gotten done in, you know, the first 6 years or almost 6 years of his administration. Although I actually think that one of the issues that he didn't mention, where it is much more important, is the issue of judicial nominees, both to the federal circuit courts and especially if there are any Supreme Court nominations. The chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate that will confirm the nomination will be a Republican instead of a Democrat, and the all the committee will be stacked with Republicans instead of a Republican majority instead of a Democratic majority, so that would make a big difference. I noticed that I'm coming up to almost 8 p.m. my time here, and I promised some people here I would finish my show by 8 p.m., and I do appreciate that I've had so many people watching the show live. I think it's been about 85 people here at the end. I have been reading your comments along the way, so they haven't been wasted, though. I notice you've mostly been arguing with each other. I did see one person ask along the way about my shirt here if I actually went to Yale. I have an undergraduate degree in history from Yale University, which I think helps me a little bit with my commentary on some issues, so I should let you know about that, I guess, but I'm not going to really delve into the comments much more. I'm going to finish up the show. I am working on an edited, produced video that's going to be on whether the events in Ferguson, Missouri and the shooting of Michael Brown are representative of a racial caste system in the United States. Actually talking about this book over my left shoulder here, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, about mass incarceration. I'm hoping to have that video done maybe the end of this week, maybe Friday or Saturday it will be up, and it has some Daily Show clips and a Colbert Report clip and an All In with Chris Hayes clip, so look for that. And also I'll be putting up an excerpt video from this long show tomorrow night, I hope sometime, so look for that. And thanks for joining me. I'll be doing Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup every Sunday for the foreseeable future at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. I hope you will continue to join me. I hope you appreciated the clips that I picked out for you from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the corporate media here in the United States. I hope you ended your weekend or started off your week a little bit more informed about what the corporate media thinks is important and about this upcoming speech from President Obama this Wednesday, and maybe I'll even end up covering that somehow on my channel. I can't be sure, but thanks for joining me again, and I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.